Ramsey Michael states, the uncomfortable fact is that we know little or nothing of the historical setting of 1 Peter. Now, I think this is a bit of a broad statement as we do have some information within the text and within scholarship to help us understand what is going on. But I understand what he's getting at because Peter's writing to a region of churches, a bunch of churches, and he implies that this text is from Babylon. So it's a little bit of trying to figure out what the clues mean and what they would have understood these things to mean within the text. In terms of origin, chapter 5, verse 13 points to the fact that this letter comes from Babylon. However, as scholars have noted, due to the dating of when this letter would be written and the dating of when Babylon was destroyed, it seems unlikely that this be referring to Babylon itself. But given that biblical authors are known for taking names of places or theological terms and using it on multiple people, sometimes calling different nations that are imposing upon Israel as Egypt when it earlier states as a different nation, or as Babylon, shows that sometimes they use this language to point to these are the big bads of the time and of the big bads of Jewish theology. For the Jews, Babylon would be a big, major enemy to them, and so describing Rome as Babylon makes a lot of sense, given where he might have been based on the time of this letter being written in the 60s. Peter's epistle is addressed to the exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. These would have been provinces of Rome within Asia Minor, of which Mark Wilson states, Peter's provinces are instead oriented toward the Black Sea and centered on northern and eastern churches not reached by the journeys of Paul. He also states that although these locations seem ill-defined, a closer examination of their sociopolitical dimensions permits the development of a geographical profile. The likelihood is that Peter himself planted some of these churches in these provinces as he traveled westward. Eusebius seems to agree with this in his writings on the Histories. He states that Peter appears to have preached in Pontus, Galatia, Bithynia, Cappadocia, and Asia to the Jews of the dispersion. And at last, having come to Rome, he was crucified head downwards, for he had requested that he might suffer in this way. As Peter Davids notes, these are Christians living in the northwest quadrant of Asia Minor, bordering the Black Sea, an area that Luke reports Paul was not allowed to evangelize, according to Acts chapter 16, verse 6 through 10. And so we have a clear idea of who this audience is within these certain regions of which would have some Jewish influence. What's interesting is that within the text, Peter talks to his audience as if they are very familiar with Jewish text. But some scholars, such as Peter Davids, notes that these seem to be probably largely Gentile in terms of people group. But these Gentiles would have been infatuated with the Jewish scriptures as converts to Christianity. They wanted to be able to understand the depths of the Jewish text, so they gave themselves over to it. And this is why Peter's able to address them with such Jewish language. Now, it's not to say there were no Jews in the area, but it seems to be based on scholarship that was a good mixture of churches, with Gentile being the primary and Jews being a little more secondary, but they shared deeply a reverence for the text. However, what's interesting about the provinces is that there seems to be an order that reflects the way in which the letter would travel due to the actual region, that they would be traveling from the northern region all the way to the southern region of Galatia and Cappadocia, but then coming back to Bithynia through the provinces of Asia. There seems to be an actual path that the deliverer would be taking and therefore is bringing it to them in such a way. As Scot McKnight states regarding the audience again, though they came from a Gentile background, Peter addresses them as if they were Israel. McKnight continues to state that from the beginning of the letter to the end, Peter describes the church with terms that have been used in defining Israel. They are the elect and scattered ones and a holy priesthood. Most prominent here is, you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people belonging to God. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. This is the language of fulfillment and replacement. In general, then we can safely conclude that the audience of Peter was comprised of Gentile converts to Christianity who probably had been proselytes to Judaism, or at least God-fearers. Again, this makes sense given the region that they are in, which is why Peter is addressing them in such a way, as he's addressing them as Jews, but also because they have Gentile background and they're being sent down these northern regions. Regarding the content of the letter, Peter is addressing some of the things that are happening within this area, in that, culturally speaking, the people of those regions seem to be treating the Christians as lesser than and not as true members of the community, as if they are completely exiled, as they are foreigners, which is the language that Peter uses regarding his recipients. As John Elliott states, the Jesus followers were strangers and aliens in a double sense. On the one hand, their ranks were composed of resident aliens and temporary visitors who lived in an estranged relationship with their local neighbors. The first of these terms in the Greek text is par oikos. Etymologically, the term refers to someone who is away from home, which is the oikos, living in a land, and alongside, which would be the par. People who are not kith and kin to to whom one does not naturally belong. As he points out, that the words that are used here are used 4 times in the New Testament with Acts 7:6, 7:29, Ephesians 2:19, and 1 Peter 2:11, with the root as oikos, of which refers to the house, household, sentence, and nation, etc. Whereas its accompanying term of parapidemos is found in 1 Peter 2:11, refers to one who is a temporary visitor passing by, which is used 3 times in the New Testament with Hebrews 11:13, 1 Peter 1:1, and 1 Peter 2:11. So this one's used significantly less. Both are not used quite a lot, but this one's primarily used by Peter. And it's rust demos, of which refers to a crowd of people or assembly, of which this points to a foreign assembly. Elliott continues to state that in 1 Peter, the term resident aliens does not identify the addresses as exiles or pilgrims, as many biblical translations misleadingly suggest. It certainly does not imply a pilgrimage on earth. Earth does not appear in the original Greek text. Like the official term resident alien in the National Codes of Law, the word in 1 Peter refers to a specific segment of the population who, because of foreign origin and allegiances, has limited political, legal, and social rights, which then explains a lot of what Peter is talking about in the first 2 chapters, where he's talking about submitting to your master if you're a slave, submitting to your husband if they are not a Christian, a variety of positions of submission where you can demonstrate the gospel towards your neighbor, towards those who don't know the gospel, by your action, by your love for fulfilling the Great Commission, and just even by your actions and your words. Scot McKnight, piggybacking off John Elliott's work, states that these terms refers respectively to a social status to non-citizen residents in some places, that is, a person residing in a place without rights, and to temporary residents in some place. Such a social displacement was normal in the history of Israel, even if it was the result of the hand of God himself. In the Roman Empire, these terms were used of the group of resident aliens who occupied a special rung on the social ladder, below the citizens and above the slaves and foreigners. Again, this makes sense of the language of Peter within this letter, within those middle chapters. And you get to chapter 4, where he's talking about it being a good thing to suffer for Christ. These people were effectively nobodies in this region because they claimed to follow Jesus Christ. However, this is not to discount the idea of spiritual exile as well, and the idea that we are not of this world, as the New Testament does play into this language. And you can still get a little bit of that with 1 Peter. As scholars have noted, this seems to be focused more on the fact that due to the communal exile that these Christians are going through, that this is dealing with how they should be acting amongst that, in spite of those things, how they should act out in love, how they should not be retaliating, how they should be following the teachings of Jesus regarding the Sermon on the Mount, and how they should be turning the other cheek, how they should be acting in submission, how they should be acting in love, and they're just demonstrating the gospel of Jesus Christ in everything that they do. Scot McKnight again notes that furthermore, the analogy today is clearly to our homelessness and our society, whether that be a spiritual isolation or social manipulation, and our at-homeness in God's family. Even more, it becomes important for the Church of Jesus Christ to find the social cracks and those who have fallen through, and then to minister the gospel of God's acceptance to them, to show them that God's true family transcends and neglects the social boundaries that society constructs. Now, this is a little uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable for me to kind of read because sometimes we kind of read with only one specific lens. In this case, we tend to read with only a spiritual lens, and then we don't always see the lifetime application. Or we tend to make ourselves even more at tension with the world in a way that is not following with Christ, and that we are starting to find flesh and blood and make them enemies, which is against what Paul was saying, which he was referring to the powers and principalities in regarding to spiritual forces, and that we as Christians should understand that there are people who are still trapped in sin, and that we should be showing love to them, and that we should be loving our enemies, loving those who persecute us at a high level that they can't do anything but see the gospel of Jesus Christ. Whereas 1 Peter points out in chapter 3 that we are able to provide a response or a defense or a reason for the hope that we have, and to do so with gentleness and respect in such a way that they have nothing to say about us except for we have good character and we have good reasons. What they would have to do is they would have to slander us entirely, which is what happened to Jesus when he was before the council and before he was sent to Pilate. So within 1 Peter's epistle, what we have here is his call to his brothers and sisters, to go and live according to the teachings of Jesus, to make sure that they are following through. And Peter understands that they're going through trials, they're going through hardships, that they are being treated lesser than, that they're not being treated as part of the community, part of the city, that they are being exiled, they're being treated as foreigners, as not in. Family is rejecting each other, friends are rejecting each other because they choose to follow Jesus. And what is Peter's response to that? Act in submission, act in love, and count it all joy by the very idea that you're being persecuted for the name of Jesus Christ. It says, count it joy that they're singling you out because you are a Christian. Good. That is a good thing. And this is where we start to see Christian, which before would be a term used as an attack on us, almost like a derogatory term. Peter uses it as a badge of honor right here in this book. And what we know of Christian history is the more persecution people face within the Christian realm, and the more they're living out the gospel, the more people tend to be converted because they're seeing the gospel in action and they're hearing the gospel in words. They're hearing and seeing it. They're seeing people who are not only just saying things about the gospel, but they're living the gospel. And the actions and words match each other. Their character and their words point to Christ in all that they do, even if they're going through hardships. And that is the beautiful application of 1 Peter for us today as well, that no matter what your situation is, whether you're being exiled, you're being treated as a foreigner, that you're being persecuted, whatever that looks like, count all joy to be done so in the name of Christ, and to act in submission to the authorities that you have, and to go out and just live the gospel, to pursue Christ, to count it joy to be persecuted, but also to live out the teachings of Jesus, so that when they ask you for the hope that you have in you, you can give a proper apologia, a proper response, a proper defense for the hope that you have in you, and you're able to do so with gentleness and respect, that they have two options, either believe what you say or completely reject you and slander what you've done. And that is the beautiful thing about the gospel, is that people will know when you've been slandered. They will figure it out. It does not take long for people to figure out that it just doesn't add up. Pilate figured out quickly that it did not add up that Jesus was before him to be crucified. It did not take him long. But they came before him saying that he deserves it. And they were trying before in the Sanhedrin to find all these reasons to persecute him, to find reasons to crucify him. And they were, as it says in the text, coming up with stories that just did not work. And Peter understands the example of Jesus right here. And he says, do that very thing. Do what Jesus did. You act in such a loving way, that you submit to your authorities in such a way, that you live in such a way, and that your words match that they can't do anything but slander you or ask you about who Jesus Christ is. And that is the beautiful context of 1 Peter.